to see the meeting. So just note that it will be recorded. Welcome to all of you. We won't have time for everybody to introduce themselves, but please look at the participant list if you want to see who is with us in the meeting. I'll just quickly go through the agenda. I think you have all received the agenda, you've received the annual report. But in short, I will just take a minute or two to introduce the report. I'm sure most of you have read it, so I'm not going to go into it in great detail. But then it would be very good to get feedback from you on some of the issues that are in the report. So we'll spend a few minutes on that. But then I guess our main time will be devoted to speaking about those studies we would like to undertake in 2021 and maybe even 2022. So we'll spend some time on that. We can also talk a little bit about other activities and events that we may be planning in the next year. And of course, if there's any other issues you would like to raise, we can do that as well. We've set aside 1 hour for this. We'll try to stick to that time frame. So we do appreciate very much in this time of Zoom overload for all of us, for that you are giving us this time to spend some time together to talk about where we are with the Effectiveness of Peace Operations Network and what our plans are for the next year or two. So maybe just to touch on the highlights in terms of a kind of an annual report. As I said, we have distributed the report, and I'm sure you have had a chance to look at that. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but we have now conducted 6 studies. Thank you very much to all the different research teams that have undertaken those studies. They all published on the website in various formats, including several e-reading formats. We have 3 studies that are currently underway. So we have teams looking at the EU and OEC missions in Ukraine, the UN verification mission in Colombia, and the UN mission in Cyprus. And these studies have been interrupted by COVID-19, as you can imagine, but we have decided now to go ahead virtually with those studies. And we will assess sometime in the first quarter of 2021 whether we will conclude those studies just with the virtual research outreach, or whether we will actually engage in field research, wait a little bit and do field research if we can at that time, and see where we are in the first quarter of next year. And then, of course, we have the website, and we have the publications and other items on there. So any feedback that you would like to offer on that and the format in which we present the studies, or on the content of the studies, on the methodology, all those items are open for discussion, and something you can raise now in response to this presentation. In terms of partners, we have a very kind of a loose arrangement. Basically, anybody who is interested in joining one of the studies or are interested in some of the events, we are open to partners from all over the world, and both in terms of institutions, but also individuals. So currently we have about 66 institutions that are part of the network, but a much larger distribution, of course, in terms of our information. We've had a number of seminars this year, mostly after the COVID, since March, virtually. Geneva Peace Work, Stockholm Peace Forum, and various others. I've shared those with you, so if you have any comments or questions about those, please raise that. You'll be familiar with our social media. So maybe just 2 last things to mention and to reiterate. The one is our funding model. We have, initially when we set out, the whole idea with the network was that we want to undertake these studies together collaboratively, and that therefore we decided to embark on this kind of self-funding model, where our partners cover their own cost when we undertake the research studies. In some cases, especially where the studies in Africa, we have funding to support some partners. But this has worked very well, and we really want to thank all our partners who have so generously contributed and enabled the network to undertake the kind of research that is undertaking. So for instance, if I think especially about the missions that are currently underway in Ukraine and Colombia and Cyprus, most of those costs are actually covered by our partners, and not by us as NUPI, or through the grant. We have a grant from the Research Council in Norway that supports the network, but not the actual research. So we are very grateful for everyone involved and participating in that process. So I'll stop there in terms of a general introduction of the report, and I'll open the floor if you have any comments or reflections on the report, or on the studies, on the content of the studies, on the methodology, on how they've been presented. We can discuss that for a few minutes, and then we'll move on to discussing the studies we want to undertake next year. I think we can use the raise hand function if you would like to take the floor. I don't see anyone. If I do miss anyone, you can maybe just open your microphone and take the floor. Yes, General Asthana, please go ahead, sir.
Firstly, my compliments to you and to the team of NUPI, as well as to the entire EPON for having undertaken so many events despite COVID. And going through your annual report, certainly the point where I want to highlight is that the research studies which you have picked up for 21-22, they are very well thought of, because these are reasons, or these are regions where I think there is a fair amount of question mark, or shall we say a little bit of uncertainty because of various situations happening. For example, we had the case in Unifil, a blast occurred, and I think the whole dimension changed. And similarly, certain other destabilization factors happened there. And most importantly, which is nearer to us from India, that is Afghanistan, with the recent announcement of 2,000 American troops going back, or the multinational force going back, and this mission being there since 2002, a fair amount of uncertainty exists. And not only that, an uncertainty also exists as to whether UN peacekeeping has a major role in COIN or not. Secondly, this question can best be answered in picking up a model of this kind. So that is why I did convey that perhaps this is one area which I find it quite interesting. Similarly, a large number of studies which you have listed out, I think they are very well thought of, because there is a question on multilateral system. There are various systems working in various peacekeeping missions, which includes sometimes EU, sometimes there are self-appointed peacekeepers, like a very recent case of Azerbaijan and Armenia, where the Russian peacekeepers are there. So there's a fair amount of peacekeeping effort going on by different players with different colors, and it is being seen by different colors in various parts of the world. So I think certain studies which indicate wherever there are a large number of agencies which are trying to do the same job, I think it will be a very fantastic studies or areas to study. So I'm sure with views of all other participants and all other partners, we will be able to arrive at these things. But I certainly found one thing and I thought I must compliment that these are very well selected points. And I think the report is self-explanatory, so I don't think there's anything to be talked about that.
Thank you very much, General. And maybe then with that mention as well, we can move on if there's no specific points anybody would like to raise in response to the report or past activities. Let's move on and discuss some of the future activities that we may want to undertake in 2021 or beyond. Let me just first perhaps mention that one of the things that we thought we would start doing in next year is to, in addition to the studies we undertake ourselves like we did in the past, there is now other studies that are being undertaken, some that are using the EPON methodology or partly the EPON methodology, or that are undertaken by partners in a way that is related to the same themes that we are covering. And so we thought that one of the things we would start doing in 2021 is also using our EPON network to share those, let's say, related studies. And by example, I will turn to Jair van der Lijn, because he and a few partners are undertaking a series of studies on EU training missions. And that will probably be one of the series of studies that we could share also and engage with through the EPON network. So Jair, could you say a few words and just share with the others what you are doing in terms of the EU studies?
Sure, thank you, Cedric. At CIPRI, we found funding to conduct studies into the effectiveness of the EU military training missions, actually in general, but there are 3 of them. So that's the one in Mali, the one in CAR, and the one in Somalia, which have been actually conducted, or are still, to some extent, one of them is still ongoing this year. Paul Williams conducted the one on Somalia, EUTM Somalia. And then 2 people working at CIPRI have been doing the work on Mali and CAR. Basically, what we do is the same as, we follow the EPON framework, except that we do it a little bit shorter. So our conflict analysis is not as lengthy, but we also look at, what impact is. We use the same factors for that. And we look also at the same explanatory factors for success or effectiveness. We try to keep it a little bit shorter. Unfortunately, we're not able to do it with a huge team. So what we've done this year is we had one researcher, let's say from well, these cases at least the north, working together with one, sometimes 2 from the host country itself. And well, we're looking at the effectiveness in thus far, at least, into the effectiveness of EUTM missions. Those are, of course, different from, let's say, the multi-dimensional ones that we've been looking at so far within the EPON framework. But I think that you can still look at them using the same framework. At least we've been able to do it so far. And then next year, actually, what we want to do, what our intention is to continue doing this, looking into EU CAP missions. That's the capacity building missions. And that would then be the one in Mali, the one in Somalia, and the one in Niger. And that's about it, I guess. If there are questions, or if you have a question, feel free to ask. Oh, and of course, to me, although it's it's a different funding stream, and we have to for reasons of funding basically do it slightly different. But to me, it's just as much EPON, I would say, than any other study.
Excellent, thank you very much, Jair. And if there's any questions for Jair, please go ahead. One of my colleagues are going to take a screenshot photo in the next 10 seconds. So if you don't want to be in that photo, please feel free to just take off your camera for a moment. So then the other, or put your camera on. I see some colleagues are joining for the screenshot photo. Please do. Thank you very much, Jair. And maybe to introduce our discussion on the studies, just to remind everybody more or less, what we are aiming for. Our aim is, of course, is to do studies involving multiple partners. Most of our studies have ranged from about 3 to 8 partners. If it goes beyond, 6 to 8, it starts to become, of course, more difficult to coordinate multiple vehicles and all kinds of things like that. But the idea is that we have a team made up of multiple partners representing different disciplines, different parts of the world. That's what our intention is with having this kind of a collaborative partnership. And of course, people representing different disciplines, different focus areas. And these should of course ideally match with your own research interests. And what we've seen in the past is that people maybe had some research funding to work in a particular area, but by joining an EPON team, it eases their entry into the country because we have one arrangement with the United Nations or with the African Union or whom it may be, that eases also the burden on them in terms of hosting multiple research visits and so forth. And then we combine and work out how we work together and cover as many of the themes we would like to cover as we can in a particular study, taking into account our methodology and so on. So that's broadly our approach. So if you have questions about that aspect as well, please do ask. So in the notes for the meeting, we put out a kind of a wish list of a broad number of options, some of them that have come up in discussions with many of you over the last couple of months of, what are some of the places that we could think of focusing on. Normally, we've undertaken about 4 studies a year. And so, of course, we can already now also start thinking about studies beyond 2021. But the countries we've shared with you, one is Afghanistan, that General Asthana also now mentioned, and then those partners who would be interested in an Afghanistan study could talk together in terms of what exactly the focus would be, in terms of what we look at there. Certainly the role of UNAMA, the role of the EU, the role of NATO and other operations, bilateral and other operations is partly what one could look at. I mean, one of the themes that you will hear coming up in many of the countries that we have in mind for 2021 is looking beyond a single mission. So a lot of the studies we've undertaken now have looked at a particular mission, let's say the UN mission in the Congo. But we are interested in also looking at, let's take another option is, let's say Mali or Somalia would be another example, where you have multiple missions, the African Union, the European Union, the United Nations, others, G5 Sahel, Barkhane in Mali and so on. And one question with one consideration for studies would be to look at all of those together in terms of what is the collective effort of the international community in this kind of multi-partner peace operation scenario. Is it possible to say something about the overall effectiveness of this initiative? Where are the gaps? How is coordination taking place? Looking at that set of issues. So certainly that could also be a framing, for instance, for an Afghanistan study. Others in that context would be, as I mentioned, Mali or Somalia, perhaps. Kosovo is also a study that some colleagues mentioned. And there one, of course, could look at the UN mission, but also the EU mission that played a particularly important role there in terms of police and law enforcement, and of course the NATO mission. Another one would be on the African side, especially looking at the multinational joint task force and the African Union and regional Lake Chad Basin regional stabilization strategy that kind of represents this, let's say, broad civilian stabilization dimension as opposed to the MNJTF, the force, and how those together complement and look at that kind of operation. Libya has been mentioned. South Sudan has been mentioned in terms of the degree to which that situation has changed. And even there was also consideration of then also looking at the role of IGAD, AU and others. So those are, I think, the missions that we've mentioned. The Democratic Republic of Congo was also mentioned. We have done a study, I guess now 2 years ago, in the Congo. But as that mission moves closer to drawing down and withdrawing, another study is certainly possible, looking at especially the transition. So those are some of the studies that have been mentioned. If any one of you would like to take the floor and discuss some of these studies, or your interest in any of these studies, or any others that you would like to propose or to mention, please do take the floor. The floor is open. Rolf, please go ahead.
Thanks, Cedric. And this is less my own interest in a particular study, but just on a sort of general topic. I mean, one of the things that has struck me is how much literature is already out there on peacekeeping, and how relatively little there is on special political missions, especially at a moment like this when we see missions becoming smaller, et cetera, et cetera. I know we have done some SPMs. I mean, UNAMA is effectively an SPM now, Columbia as well, so I think that's important. But yeah, I mean, just as a sort of looking at the literature, and I was helping PMD and DPET with a project to compare the work of, or to assess the joint work of a special envoy alongside a peace operation, like in the Lebanon context, which I think goes towards some of what you were discussing around the AU, UN, EU sort of international community collaboration, but maybe even taking it, you know, a step less ambitious, because that is it's a very big piece to look at, and to look at just how does the UN itself, with a political presence and maybe a peacekeeping presence, but even if the political presence is by themselves, how effective are they? Yeah, I think we're at a moment where a small presence on the ground can sound like a solution to everything, and I think that's an assumption that hasn't been tested very well. I think you're muted, Cedric. Cedric, I don't think we can hear you.
Sorry about that. Thank you for all the waves to tell me you can't hear me. I was saying that, thank you very much, Rolf. I think that's an important and interesting point, that we are increasingly looking at SPMs. I mean, for EPON, we are looking at peace operations and the whole spectrum. And so we are very interested, and a couple of the studies or countries that I've mentioned, of course, do involve SPMs. And if you and others are interested in doing a more narrow study on an SPM, not going broad and looking at all the actors, of course, that is absolutely possible as well. I think the one thing with this network is that we're very flexible, and we go with what the partners are interested in, what is possible. So all of these options are on the table. Annika, did you ask for the floor?
I did, yeah. As I had written to you already with my thoughts, that I thought Haiti would be a good case study to look at, as a case study in transition, and looking at the rule of law aspects, particularly also the policing aspects and the political process. That would be something that we would be interested in pursuing, and we're happy to have partners along for that, so whoever's interested.
Thank you very much, Annika. Yeah, also, if you are, so basically how it normally works is, somebody indicates to us that they're interested in a particular study, and then we put together different people who may be interested in a particular study. Typically, somebody leading these studies are key, And that can either come from us reaching out and trying to identify somebody, but if you are also interested in doing that, that would be very useful for us as well to know. And then we put together, those partners who may be interested in a particular study area, and it kind of emerges and builds from there. So even if not in this format, if you want to afterwards send an email to me or so on, please do that. Anyone else would like to take the floor? Linda, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Cedric. I'm not sure if the special technical assistance offered by the AU to the Gambia will qualify under the study, but that is another case that might be interesting for us. It's relatively new. The AU has hinted on the possibility of reusing that model. We in the Gambia, you have the AU, you have the ECOWAS, you have the UN, you have the EU, all players in this small country, and a number of dynamics at play. So I think if it qualifies under this framework, it might be an interesting case to look at. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. And for those of you who have not yet met Linda, I don't know if there's anybody like that in this world, but Linda is the coordinator of our Training for Peace program. And of course, the Training for Peace program has also been a major part of the Effectiveness of Peace Operations Network, and in especially contributing to the research we've done in Africa. So thank you very much for that, Linda. If there's no one else that would like to take the floor right now, I recognize Ambassador Ahmed Abdel-Latif, who's the new director at the CCCPA. I was actually going to ask you also, Ambassador, to introduce yourself to the colleagues in this network who may not know you. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the floor. It's a great pleasure to be taking part in this meeting and to be involved in this network. So I've just assumed my position around a month ago as the new Director General of CCCPA. By my background, I'm a diplomat by training, and I've worked for a long time on multilateral issues in the context of the UN, with a focus on sustainable development as a broad theme, but also energy, food security, climate, so I'm actually very happy to see, at least in that, this dimension between sustainable peace and the sustainable peace and peace building dimensions are increasingly important in the context of also peacekeeping, and so that is the broad peace continuum is something at CCCPA that we are very much focused on and interested on, and it fits also with my own background. But I've also been talking to my colleagues who have been involved in some of the EPON studies, and very happy with our participation in the studies and in the network, and appreciate very much the presentation, the annual report that was prepared. So thank you very much. If I could just say one or two comments on the studies, actually. I think two points. I mean, the issue of timing. I think the timing of where these different operations are is interesting, and I mean, I was very happy with the UNAMID study. It was very timely study with the winding down of UNAMID. So I think that the timing here was very important and spot on in terms of issuing the study at the same time that this was happening. So from that perspective, I also think that we're interested in, for this reason, in the Congo study, the Congo exit, the MONUSCO exit, because it's a very important region. The exit part is very also challenging and has its own challenge apart from the mission itself. I mean, it's so that could be one element. The second point, in addition to the timing, is the issue of complexity. this whole, what you mentioned about this whole multilateral system operations. I mean, we're seeing a multiplicity of actors involved and how the interface between them takes place. So from that perspective, I think some of the studies that involve this multilateral, this whole of multilateral are also of interest for us, and particularly Mali, but also South Sudan. But then it raises for me the issue of you know, the adjustment needed in the research capability and in the way the studies conducted and all of that. If when you have such a multiplicity of actors also, and that is also another aspect. But look very much forward to participate in that effort. If I could just a small comment on the UNAMID. It would be very useful if it was possible, or if there was no objection to look into the possibility of translating the executive summary, for example, of the UNAMID study in Arabic. You know, because I understand many of the people interviewed, you know, spoke Arabic during the interviews, and given also the you know, the Sudanese audience of this and stakeholders. So if that could be considered and similar in the future, if there's a possibility of some partner willing to contribute to that, I mean, and I'll stop here. Thank you again for the opportunity, and a pleasure to be part of the network and of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you to the Cairo Center. I think you have been part of maybe 4 of the 6 studies so far, so been a very strong partner. Very good idea in terms of the translation of the executive summary. As you know, we've done that for the Francophone missions into French, and we would gladly do that in terms of this mission. So maybe we'll follow up with you also in terms of identifying a good translator who understands peacekeeping and can do a good translation, and then we could definitely work with you on that. I think that's an excellent idea. We are also still working with Rolf and Wibke and the other members of that team to identify a date, I guess maybe in December or January, where we can do a virtual seminar to discuss the findings of the report with especially an Addis Ababa community, but also others. One of the things that I notice in various other work is that there's a lot of interest, in addition to the interest that is very timely and relevant, as you mentioned, in terms of Darfur. There's also interest in learning more about what lessons can we learn from the hybrid model, from the joint mission model. So I think that's also something for taking out of that study forward. Thank you very much. Anybody else would like to take the floor? Okay, anything else under any other business that someone would like to raise? Maybe one thing I want to ask, I see, Anicia, I see your hand. I'm going to come back to you in a minute, but I just want to give Maria and Annika a warning that I'm going to ask them to just say a few words about EPON in a minute after you've spoken. And they can explain to you what EPON is. I think some of you have heard us speaking about that before. But we are now busy taking steps to operationalize that in 2021. So before we get to that, Anicia from DCAF, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Very glad to be able to join you this afternoon. It's the first time I actually have the opportunity to join the EPON network meeting. I would also like to congratulate the great work you've been doing. A lot of the reports are extremely useful in terms of the analysis provided, which we also, particularly in the International Security Sector Advisory team, use mostly to, let's say, to strengthen then also our analysis in supporting our governing board members. So we do mostly operational oriented work in supporting policy and programming. There is a department of DCAF that is doing much more longer term and method trend oriented research along the lines of the research that most of you actually do. But we've recently done actually 2 lesson identification studies. In 2018, a study of UNMIL, and this year just finalizing now also a study on UNAMID. But our studies are much more narrowly focused, and we have worked mostly on rule of law, human rights, and security sector reform components. However, I mean, in terms of our own lessons of doing this, it's quite resource intensive. And therefore, if there is an opportunity to collaborate also going forward, and in particular, looking at the list of studies that you have put forward, certainly the one on South Sudan would be of interest for us to probably partner, because one of the key aspects we always look at in terms of the work we do is precisely on coordination. And so being able to look at the presence of IGAD in particular, but then EU as well, with whom we work closely, the UN and the AU in particular, would make sense. What I would like to say as well is that obviously that would depend on us being able to obtain the funding, but and we would never be able to take on the lead on such a study, but we would be glad to come and potentially be a contributor. In terms of the methodologies, which I've taken the chance to actually look and see how this is structured and how we could potentially contribute. I mean, a lot of what you have there as the main strengths also correspond to what we do. I mean, a conflict analysis, the context analysis, some of your key analytical explanatory factors like the primacy of politics, all of these, even if we start, in our studies to look at more operational aspects from the more strategic perspective of looking at the mandates of the missions and how the delivery of an implementation is actually carried out, these become quite strong then in the findings themselves. So from that perspective, of course, I mean, having finalized our study too, we look forward to collaborate potentially in dissemination, where we certainly are going to have shared audiences. We also work quite closely with the African Union, so there's an opportunity there, but also elsewhere. We have partnered in the past as well in Geneva Peace Week. So I'm quite sure we could explore that, but going forward, certainly I would like to put on the table that we would potentially be interested to partner on South Sudan. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anicia. And there's a lively chat going on in the chat box as well. So those of you who have a time to look at that as well or contribute there. I see there's a lot of interest on the SPMs. And so I think, in addition to maybe working together to identify which SPMs we would like to focus on potentially, the issue of methodology also comes up that Anicia also mentioned now, because our methodology was, of course, primarily developed originally for the first missions, which were multidimensional peacekeeping operations. So for instance, there's an emphasis on protection and so on. But we have colleagues already underway now, as I said, the studies in Ukraine, Colombia, Cyprus, which is traditional missions. So we are already doing studies in missions that are a little bit different from what the methodology was originally designed for. So maybe one thing that could also be interesting to work together on is if there's a number of people who are interested to specifically work on the methodology and how we should adapt the methodology for SPMs, that could also be an interesting, let's say, piece of work that a number of partners could engage in. So do reach out to me if you would be interested in that as well. Okay, let me go to Annika and Maria and to talk a little bit about the EPON. Wibke, did you want to say something first?
Yeah, just very quickly, I completely agree on the importance of the SPMs and on Ralph's point, and great if we can broaden the portfolio over the next year or two on including more of those. Having said that, and at the same time, we'd also be quite interested to partner on missions where Germany makes a military contribution, so to those multi-dimensional missions, such as Mali or perhaps UNIFIL. So parallel interests also in those areas. And of course, as CIF for a while has now been a seconding organization, we are of course interested in the efforts that are ongoing on EU missions and also OSCE missions, and perhaps we can catch up with colleagues on those. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wibke. And Thomas Mandrup also just WhatsApped me with the suggestion, which I think is very relevant to yours as well. Of course, we have 6 studies now. We'll probably have 9 in a few months. So we are starting to build up a body of research that we can also use for meta research. I know there's a couple of colleagues at the Norwegian Defence University College and partners at the Center for Peace Studies at the University of Tromsø that already want to use the studies we've done so far to look at, for instance, women, peace and security across the different studies. What can we learn from that? So there's also those thematic opportunities that we can use to look either into this using the studies, the reports we've done so far, but also, of course, as Anicia mentioned, for instance, in security sector reform or elsewhere, we can identify thematic themes that we can also work on together. Okay, EPOT. Annika, Maria, who's going to start? Annika.
Shall I start, Maria? Is that okay? Yeah. So the EPOT, the effectiveness of peace operations visualization tool, the V, we didn't quite fit into that abbreviation, so it's just EPOT and not EPFOT or something like that, is the brainchild of Maria and myself. Safer Globe and CIF worked together with a Finnish tech company, Futurize, and the idea was to create an interactive website where we could visualize the research results from the EPON research reports. And some of you had seen a previous demonstration that we did at one of our meetings in Oslo. The idea was to make the results from those EPON studies as accessible as possible to a wide audience. So far, the status now is that we have finished the pilot version, which people can have a look at. And we are looking for a tech company, and where we've asked for bids from different tech companies to move the pilot to full functionality, which would include a proper database for case studies and an interface for entering those case studies. Currently, the pilot version has a generic text as well as text from the South Sudan case study from a couple of years ago. And it follows, I should just say that it follows the EPON methodology and structure that's laid out in the methodology. Hopefully, if we can get the tech company signed up as soon as possible, we should be able to move to full functionality, hopefully by next summer. So that would be, that's my short intro. If Maria, if you'd like to add anything.
That was a very good kind of update on what's happening. Just to kind of backtrack, the only thing that I'd like to add is that this EPOT, the reason why we started originally to think about creating it was so that the material of the case studies would be more readily available. And the way that it is now designed is so that users can go and basically click around and explore the material of the case studies in an interactive way. So it would strengthen, hopefully, the impact of the case study reports.
Sorry, step back. Yes, I was saying that the EPOT methodology, I think, is an interesting experiment for us to see, how people want to engage with these reports in an alternative way, not just, reading a document from beginning to end, but looking at specific themes and exploring that and interaction between different themes. So So we think that's an interesting route to explore. Okay, I know there's colleagues from Asia for whom it must be very late in the evening. Thank you very much for your dedication. We don't want to keep anybody beyond the hour, but we still have a few minutes if anybody else would like to make a contribution before we close this annual meeting today. Okay, then if there's nothing else, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your engagement with the network. We've had very good feedback and interest on the studies so far, from the United Nations, from the African Union, from other institutions that are actually deploy peace operations and that work on this, and of course from the research community, from policy institutions and so on. So we're very encouraged with the interest in the studies, and we are very encouraged by so many of you who are engaging with the process. So thank you so much again for spending this time with us today. Let's stay closely in touch. Reach out to me if you're interested in any of the studies we've mentioned, and then we'll start putting together those teams and those initiatives that we've touched upon. So thank you so much, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning for those of you, depending on where you are. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
great pleasure. Thank you.